The thunder of hooves against hard-packed earth was the only sound that penetrated the deafening silence of Dahlia Ziegler's heart as the carriage pulled away from the only home she had ever known. The dust cloud kicked up by the horses obscured the disappearing silhouette of her parents' farmhouse, a place where her dreams had withered under the weight of constant disapproval and biting words. "Good riddance," she whispered, her voice trembling with a mixture of sorrow and relief as she adjusted her modest blue dress, smoothing down the fabric that had seen better days. At 21, Dahlia had spent her entire life trying to please parents who found fault in everything she did. Too dreamy, they said. Too impractical. Too soft-hearted for the harsh realities of life on the Nebraska frontier in 1878. The letter from her aunt in Willow Creek, Colorado, had been her salvation or her sentence, depending on how one looked at it. Her father had thrust the correspondence at her over breakfast 3 days prior, his face a mask of grim determination. "Your Aunt Meredith needs help with her boarding house," he had stated flatly. "You're going, not a question, not a discussion. Just a declaration that her life in their home was over." Her mother had merely nodded, lips pressed together in that familiar expression of disappointment that Dahlia had grown to know so well. "Perhaps you'll find use there," her mother had added, the words cutting deeper than any physical blow could have. "God knows you haven't found it here. Useless." The word had followed Dahlia through her childhood like a shadow, useless when she preferred reading to churning butter. Useless when she composed poems instead of focusing on mending. Useless when she dreamed of something beyond the boundaries of their land. The carriage hit a rut in the road, jolting Dahlia from her thoughts. Mr. Peterson, the mail carrier who had agreed to take her as far as North Platte, glanced back with concern etched on his weathered face. "You all right back there, Miss Ziegler?" "Yes, thank you," she replied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking. It's a long journey to Colorado territory." "Plenty of time for thinking, I suppose." He turned his attention back to the road. "I've been to Willow Creek once, pretty little mining town, growing fast with the silver boom." Dahlia nodded absently, watching the endless prairie roll by. The world seemed vast and terrifying without the familiar, if cold, walls of her parents' home. In her trunk were her few possessions. 3 dresses, undergarments, a Bible, her favorite book of poetry, and a small wooden box containing the trinkets she had collected over the years, a blue jay feather, a perfect acorn, a smooth river stone. Small treasures that her parents had deemed frivolous, but that had brought her quiet joy. 4 days later, after changing to the stagecoach in North Platte, Dahlia found herself on the final leg of her journey. The terrain had changed dramatically, rolling hills, giving way to the imposing shadows of mountains in the distance. The other passengers, a mining company representative and an older woman returning to her son's home, had long since given up on conversation, lulled into silence by the monotonous swaying of the coach. It was nearly sunset when the driver called out, "Willow Creek, next stop." Dahlia's heart hammered in her chest as the stagecoach rolled into the bustling main street. Unlike her parents' isolated farmstead, Willow Creek hummed with activity. Horses tied to hitching posts pawed at the ground, men in dusty clothes spilled out of saloons, and women in practical frontier dresses hurried along the wooden sidewalks. The buildings were a mix of hastily constructed wooden structures and more substantial brick edifices, evidence of a town in transition from mining camp to permanent settlement. The coach came to a stop outside a 2-story building with a sign that read, "Willow Creek Stage Depot." "End of the line, folks," the driver announced, climbing down to open the door. Dahlia stepped out on shaky legs, overwhelmed by the noise and bustle after days of relative quiet. She clutched her small handbag, looking around uncertainly for her aunt, whom she hadn't seen since she was a child. Dahlia Ziegler, a tall, thin woman with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun, approached. Though there was little physical resemblance to Dahlia's mother, there was something in the tight set of her mouth that seemed familiar. "Aunt Meredith?" Dahlia asked hesitantly. The woman nodded briskly. Welcome to Willow Creek. I trust your journey wasn't too taxing. Before Dahlia could answer, Aunt Meredith was already turning away. Come along. My boarding house is just down the street. We need to get you settled. Tomorrow is a busy day, and I'll need you up at 5 to help with breakfast. Dahlia swallowed her disappointment. She had hoped for warmth, perhaps even a hint of the affection so lacking in her parents' home. Instead, she found herself following another stern taskmaster through streets that grew darker as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Meredith's boarding house was a well-maintained 3-story building at the quieter end of Main Street. A hand-painted sign proclaimed it the Willow Creek Lodging House, clean rooms, hot meals, reasonable rates. This is it, Meredith said, unlocking the front door. I have 12 rooms, currently 10 boarders, mostly miners and a few businessmen. I serve breakfast and dinner daily. You'll help with cooking, cleaning, laundry, and whatever else needs doing. She led Dahlia up a narrow staircase to the 3rd floor, opening a door to reveal a small attic room with sloped ceilings. A narrow bed, a washstand, and a battered dresser were the only furnishings. This is your room. Not fancy, but it's private. The other girls who have worked for me stayed here. Meredith paused, her expression softening slightly. Your mother wrote that you needed direction, structure, said you were prone to flights of fancy and not much use on the farm. Dahlia flinched, but her aunt continued. I run a tight ship here, Dahlia. There's no room for daydreaming when there are meals to cook and rooms to clean. But if you work hard, you'll have a place here. She moved toward the door. Rest tonight. Tomorrow comes early. Alone in the small room, Dahlia sank onto the bed, her composure finally crumbling. Tears slid down her cheeks as she realized that nothing had changed, only the location. She was still the useless dreamer, sent away to be someone else's burden. She wiped her tears and moved to the small window. Willow Creek spread below her, lights twinkling in windows and along the street. Beyond the town, the mountains loomed as dark shadows against the star-filled sky, beautiful, wild, and utterly indifferent to her presence. I'll prove them wrong, she whispered to the night. Somehow. Dahlia's days quickly fell into a grueling routine. Up before dawn to help prepare breakfast for the boarders, then cleaning rooms, washing linens, scrubbing floors, and assisting with dinner preparation. By the time she collapsed into bed each night, her body ached and her hands were raw from hot water and lye soap. But unlike at home, where nothing she did seemed to please her parents, Aunt Meredith at least acknowledged her efforts with curt nods and the occasional well done. It wasn't affection, but it was something. 2 weeks into her stay, Dahlia was hanging laundry in the small yard behind the boarding house when she heard the commotion. Shouts and the thunder of hooves drew her attention to the street, where a man on horseback was racing through town, weaving dangerously between wagons and pedestrians. Whoa, look out! Someone yelled as the horse nearly collided with a water barrel. The rider, clearly struggling to control his mount, yanked hard on the reins. The horse reared, front hooves pawing the air. For a heart-stopping moment, it seemed both horse and rider would topple backward. Then, with impressive skill, the man shifted his weight and brought the animal back down, though it continued to prance and sidestep nervously. Sorry, folks, the rider called out, tipping his hat apologetically to the gathering crowd. This one's got more spirit than sense today. Dahlia found herself moving closer to the fence, watching as the man, tall and broad-shouldered in a worn leather vest and faded blue shirt, spoke soothingly to the agitated horse. His hat had fallen back, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and a face tanned by outdoor life. That's Yates Whitfield, said a voice beside her. Dahlia turned to see Mrs. Collins, one of the boarders, a widow who taught at the town school. Runs the Circle W Ranch about 5 miles outside town. Good man, fair employer, bit wild himself though. As if sensing their attention, the man Yates looked their way. His eyes, startlingly blue even at a distance, met Dahlia's and he smiled, touching the brim of his hat in greeting. Flustered by the unexpected attention, Dahlia ducked her head and hurried back to her laundry, heart inexplicably racing. Later that evening, as she helped serve dinner to the boarders, Dahlia was surprised to see Yates Whitfield enter the dining room, hat in hand, deep in conversation with her aunt. "Just for a couple of weeks until I can find someone permanent," he was saying. "Jenkins says your cooking's the best in the county." Meredith looked pleased despite herself. "Mr. Jenkins is kind to say so, but I'm not sure I can spare anyone right now. We're quite busy and I'll pay double the going rate," Yates interrupted, his tone earnest. "I've got 8 ranch hands who are about to mutiny if they have to eat any more of Cookie's biscuits. Poor old fellow broke his wrist and none of us can cook worth a damn." He grinned, showing white teeth against his tanned face. "It's an emergency, Mrs. Hargrove." Meredith pursed her lips, considering. "Double rate, you say?" "Yes, madam, and I'll provide transportation to and from the ranch daily." Meredith's eyes found Dahlia across the room. "My niece might be able to help. She's new here, but she's a decent cook. Dahlia, come here." Feeling every eye in the room upon her, Dahlia approached, wiping her hands nervously on her apron. "This is my niece, Dahlia Ziegler. Dahlia, Mr. Whitfield needs a temporary cook at his ranch. I'm considering sending you if you think you can handle it." Yates turned to her and Dahlia felt her breath catch at the full force of his blue-eyed gaze. Up close, she could see laugh lines at the corners of his eyes and a small scar on his chin. "Miss Ziegler," he said, his voice warm, "would you be willing to save my men from starvation? I promise they're a grateful bunch if a bit rough around the edges." Dahlia glanced at her aunt, uncertain. I've never cooked for so many men before. It's just breakfast and dinner," Yates assured her. "Simple fare. I think you'll find cowboys aren't particularly demanding about food as long as there's plenty of it." The prospect of escaping the boarding house, even temporarily, was tempting, and something about Yates Whitfield's smile made her want to say yes. "I can try," she said softly. "Excellent." Yates clapped his hands together. "I'll send my foreman to fetch you at dawn if that suits." Meredith nodded. "She'll be ready." That night, lying in her narrow bed, Dahlia wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. What if she couldn't satisfy these hungry ranch hands? What if her cooking wasn't good enough? Another failure would only confirm what her parents had always said, that she was useless. But as sleep finally claimed her, it was Yates Whitfield's smile that followed her into her dreams, not her fears. The Circle W Ranch sprawled across a picturesque valley, with mountains rising majestically in the distance. Dahlia, perched beside Yates's foreman, a taciturn man named Frank who had picked her up in a wagon at dawn, caught her breath at the sight of the main house. It was a substantial 2-story structure of hewn logs with a wide covered porch, surrounded by various outbuildings, corrals, and a bunkhouse. "Home, sweet home," Frank said, breaking his long silence. "Kitchen's around back. Cookie's there, waiting to show you around before the boys come in for breakfast." Cookie turned out to be a grizzled old man with a splinted wrist and a perpetual squint. Despite his injury, he hovered anxiously as Dahlia explored the large, well-equipped kitchen. "Them boys eat like wolves," he warned. "Don't be stingy with portions, and they like their coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe." Dahlia nodded, already rolling up her sleeves. "I'll do my best." By the time the ranch hands filed in for breakfast, she had managed to produce a respectable spread of fried potatoes, bacon, scrambled eggs, and biscuits that were, if not perfect, at least not the weapons cookies apparently were. The men ate of them, ranging from barely older than Dahlia to weathered veterans with silver-streaked beards eyed her curiously as they took their places at the long table. "Boys, this is Miss Ziegler," Frank announced. "She's cooking for us until Cookie's wrist heals. Treat her with respect." A chorus of "Yes, sir," and "Morning, miss" followed. Dahlia smiled nervously and began serving the food, conscious of their assessing gazes. It wasn't until the meal was nearly over that Yates Whitfield appeared, looking as if he'd already been working for hours. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing strong forearms, and his hair was damp, as if he'd just washed up. "Morning, Miss Ziegler," he said, sliding onto the bench at the head of the table. "I see you've survived your first encounter with my hungry horde." The men chuckled, and Dahlia felt herself relax slightly as she placed a plate before him. "It seems so, Mr. Whitfield." He took a bite of the eggs, then the biscuits, his eyes widening in apparent pleasure. "This is delicious, isn't it, boys?" A chorus of agreement rose from the table, and Dahlia felt a warm flush of pride spread through her. Such a simple thing, cooking a meal, but the genuine appreciation in their faces was something she had rarely experienced at home. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'm glad you're enjoying it." As the days passed, Dahlia found herself settling into a rhythm at the Circle W. She rose early to prepare breakfast, then had a few hours to herself while the men worked before starting dinner preparations. It was hard work, but there was a satisfaction in watching the cowboys devour her meals with enthusiasm, sometimes even asking for her recipes to send home to their mothers or sisters. Yates often lingered after the others had left, helping her clear the table or just talking. She learned that he had inherited the ranch from his father 5 years earlier, at the age of 25, and had expanded it from a struggling operation to one of the most successful in the county. "Dad was a good rancher but a terrible businessman," he explained one evening as they sat on the kitchen steps, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. "He trusted everyone, never kept proper books. When he died, I discovered we were nearly bankrupt. How did you save it?" Dahlia asked, genuinely curious. Yates shrugged, a modest gesture at odds with his achievement. "Hard work, smart decisions, luck, and good men who were willing to stick with me through the lean times." He glanced at her, his blue eyes reflecting the dying light. "Kind of like how you've transformed our meals. Sometimes the right person in the right place makes all the difference." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. No one had ever suggested she was the right person for anything before. Their conversations became a highlight of Dahlia's days. Yates seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts, never dismissing her ideas or dreams as impractical or foolish. When she hesitantly shared some of her poetry one evening, rather than laughing, he asked her to read more. "You have a gift with words," he told her afterward, his expression thoughtful. "The way you described the mountains at sunrise, I've seen that view 1,000 times, but you made me see it new." Dahlia blushed, unused to such praise. "My parents always said poetry was a waste of time." Yates frowned. "No offense, Miss Ziegler, but your parents sound like they missed out on knowing the remarkable woman their daughter became." The words hung between them, charged with meaning. For a moment, Dahlia thought he might reach for her hand, but the moment was broken by the arrival of Frank with a question about the next day's work schedule. 2 weeks stretched into 3, then 4. Cookie's wrist was healing, but slower than expected, and Meredith agreed to extend Dahlia's stay at the ranch. The truth, though neither woman acknowledged it, was that business at the boarding house had actually improved with Dahlia's cooking techniques implemented in her absence. It was a late June evening when everything changed. A summer storm had blown in suddenly, forcing the men back to the ranch earlier than usual. Dahlia was in the kitchen, preparing a stew when Yates burst through the door, rain-soaked and urgent. "Lightning struck near the north pasture," he said without preamble. "Started a fire. The men are trying to move the cattle, but we need more hands." He hesitated, his eyes meeting hers. "I know it's not proper to ask, but I'll help," Dahlia said immediately, already reaching for her shawl. The ride to the north pasture was a blur of driving rain and distant flashes of lightning. The fire, thankfully dampened by the downpour, was more smoke than flame now, but the cattle were panicked, threatening to stampede. Dahlia had grown up around farm animals and wasn't afraid of the nervous herd. Following Yates's shouted instructions, she helped guide the cattle away from the smoldering grass toward safer ground. The work was wet, muddy, and exhausting, but there was an exhilaration in it too, in being trusted, in being useful. It was nearly midnight when they finally returned to the ranch, the crisis averted. The bunkhouse was dark, the men having retired after the long, difficult day. In the kitchen, Dahlia stoked the fire and put on water for coffee while Yates shrugged out of his sodden coat. "You were amazing out there," he said, his voice husky with fatigue and something else, admiration. "Most women I know would have fainted at the very suggestion of facing a herd of spooked cattle in a thunderstorm." Dahlia smiled, pushing a strand of wet hair from her face. "I'm not most women, I suppose." "No," Yates agreed, moving closer. "You're certainly not." In the flickering light of the kitchen fire, with rain still drumming on the roof, something unspoken passed between them. Dahlia felt her breath catch as Yates reached out, gently tucking that stubborn strand of hair behind her ear. "Dahlia," he said softly, her name sounding like a caress in his deep voice. "I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air, stunning in their simplicity and honesty. Dahlia stared at him, searching his face for any sign of jest or insincerity. But all she saw was raw vulnerability and hope. "You hardly know me," she whispered. Yates smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I know enough. I know you're kind and hardworking. I know you see beauty in things others miss. I know you make the best biscuits west of the Mississippi." His smile faded, replaced by earnestness. "And I know that when I'm with you, I feel like I've found something I didn't even realize I was missing." Dahlia's heart thundered in her chest. Never in all her daydreams had she imagined someone, especially someone like Yates Whitfield, looking at her this way, speaking to her with such tenderness. I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything right now," Yates assured her, though she could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "I just wanted you to know. Tomorrow Cookie returns, you'll go back to town, and I couldn't bear the thought of you leaving without knowing how I feel." The mention of her impending departure stung. These weeks at the Circle W had been the happiest of her life. The thought of returning to the boarding house, to the constrained existence under her aunt's watchful eye, filled her with dread. "I don't want to go," she confessed, her voice barely audible over the rain. Yates stepped closer, his hand coming up to cup her cheek. "Then stay, not as a cook, not as an employee. Stay because you want to, because maybe you feel something for me too." Dahlia closed her eyes, leaning into his touch. Did she feel something? The answer was undeniable. Yes, she felt a warmth, a connection, a rightness when she was with him that she had never experienced before. "Yates," she whispered, opening her eyes to meet his gaze. "I think I might be falling in love with you too." His smile was radiant, transforming his entire face. Slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, he lowered his head until his lips met hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer, and Dahlia felt as if she had finally, after 21 years of searching, found home. When they finally parted, both breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he murmured. "Please stay." "Yes," Dahlia whispered back. "Yes, I'll stay." The next morning, Dahlia returned to town with Frank to collect her belongings and speak with her aunt. She expected resistance, perhaps even anger, but to her surprise, Meredith merely nodded thoughtfully when Dahlia explained the situation. "Yates Whitfield is a good man," she said, pouring them both tea in her private sitting room. "Respected in the community, financially stable, not a drunk or a gambler." She eyed Dahlia over the rim of her cup. "But are you certain this is what you want? It's happened very quickly." Dahlia nodded, her resolve firm. "I've never been more certain of anything. He sees me, Aunt Meredith, the real me, not just a useless dreamer, but a person with value." Meredith's expression softened unexpectedly. "Your mother wrote that you were useless. I should have questioned that more. These past weeks, I've seen how capable you are, how intuitive. The improvements you suggested for our kitchen alone have increased our profits." She sighed. "Perhaps Ellen and I both failed to recognize your strengths because they're different from our own." Dahlia blinked back tears, touched by this belated acknowledgement. "Thank you for saying that." Meredith reached across the table to pat Dahlia's hand awkwardly, a rare gesture of affection. "If you're sure about Yates, you have my blessing. Though I hope you'll consider a proper courtship before any permanent arrangements." "Of course," Dahlia assured her, though her heart raced at the thought of permanent arrangements with Yates. Back at the Circle W, a new routine quickly established itself. Dahlia moved into a small guest room in the main house, with Mrs. Peterson, the widow who did the ranch's laundry, acting as chaperone to preserve proprieties. Cookie resumed his kitchen duties, though he often consulted Dahlia on recipes and techniques. And every evening, after dinner, Yates and Dahlia would walk together, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes simply enjoying the companionable silence as they watched the sunset paint the mountains. It was during one such walk, about a month after Dahlia had returned to the ranch, that Yates brought up the subject of her parents. "Have you written to them?" he asked as they paused by a stream that cut through the property. "About us, I mean." Dahlia sighed, watching the water bubble over rocks. "No, I'm not sure they'd care. They sent me away because I was a burden, a disappointment." Yates frowned, taking her hand in his. "You could never be a disappointment, Dahlia, never. And if they can't see the amazing woman you are, that's their loss." He hesitated. "But they're still your parents. Maybe knowing you're happy would mean something to them." Dahlia considered his words. "Perhaps you're right. I'll write to them tomorrow." Her letter was brief but honest, explaining her new situation, introducing Yates as the man she had come to love and expressing hope for their blessing. She didn't expect a reply and was surprised when, 2 weeks later, one arrived. The letter was in her mother's handwriting, the tone formal but not unkind. They were pleased to hear of her settlement and wished her well in her new endeavors. No acknowledgement of past hurts, no apology for their dismissal of her, but no further criticism either. It was, Dahlia supposed, as much as she could hope for. Yates found her on the porch after she had read it, her expression pensive. "Bad news?" he asked, settling beside her on the swing. Dahlia handed him the letter. "Not bad, just distant, as they've always been." Yates read it quickly, his brow furrowing. "They didn't even ask to meet me or invite us to visit." "That would be asking a lot," Dahlia said with a sad smile. "They've never been demonstrative people." Yates set the letter aside and took both her hands in his. "Dahlia, I need you to listen to me, really listen." His blue eyes were intense, fixed on hers. "You are not useless. You are not a burden. You are the most extraordinary woman I've ever known." Tears filled Dahlia's eyes, but Yates wasn't finished. "Your kindness, your poetry, your way of seeing beauty in everything around you, these aren't weaknesses. They're gifts, precious gifts that make you who you are." He squeezed her hands. "And who you are is all I need, all I'll ever need." The words washed over Dahlia like a healing balm, soothing hurts so old and deep she had almost forgotten they were there. "Do you really mean that?" she whispered. "With all my heart," Yates assured her. Then, to her astonishment, he slid from the swing to one knee before her, still holding her hands. "In fact, I was planning to wait for a more romantic moment, but I think this is perfect just as it is." Dahlia's heart began to race as she realized what was happening. "Dahlia Ziegler," Yates said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes, "I love you. Every part of you, your dreams, your poetry, your kindness, your strength. Will you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife?" Joy, pure, unbridled joy, surged through Dahlia. "Yes," she breathed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Yes, Yates, I'll marry you." His answering smile was brilliant as he rose to kiss her, sealing their promise with a tenderness that spoke volumes. When they parted, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "This was my mother's," he explained, opening it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "Dad always said she was the heart of our home, just like you'll be the heart of ours." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Dahlia felt a sense of rightness, of completion. From the unwanted daughter sent away in disgrace, she had become the beloved bride-to-be, valued and cherished for exactly who she was. The wedding was set for October, when the aspen trees would turn the mountainsides to gold. In the months leading up to it, Dahlia threw herself into preparations, transforming the ranch house with small, thoughtful touches that made it feel more like a home. New curtains in the parlor, herb gardens outside the kitchen, and bookshelves in the study filled with volumes of poetry and literature that she and Yates could read together on winter evenings. Word of their engagement spread quickly through Willow Creek. Most responses were enthusiastic. Yates was well-liked, and Dahlia had made friends during her time at the boarding house. But there were whispers, too, mostly from the town's more status-conscious women. "A mail-order bride would have been more suitable than a cook," Dahlia overheard Mrs. Hollister, the banker's wife, murmur to her companion at the general store. "And I've heard her own parents couldn't wait to be rid of her." The words stung, reopening wounds Dahlia had thought were healing. She completed her purchases quickly and hurried back to the wagon where Frank was waiting, her eyes downcast to hide her tears. That evening, she was unusually quiet as she helped Cookie with dinner. Yates, always attuned to her moods, found her afterward on their favorite spot on the porch. "What's troubling you, love?" he asked, settling beside her. Dahlia hesitated, reluctant to burden him with petty gossip. But they had promised honesty between them, so she recounted what she had overheard. Yates's expression darkened with anger. "That's nonsense. Eliza Hollister has always been a snob. Her opinion means nothing." "But what if she's right?" Dahlia asked softly. "What if I'm not suitable? I'm not educated like the ladies you could have chosen." "I don't know the first thing about running a ranch this size or entertaining important guests, or stop," Yates interrupted gently, taking her hands. "Dahlia, when will you understand? I didn't fall in love with you because you can run a ranch or entertain guests. I fell in love with you because you're you, because when you read your poetry, I see the world through new eyes. Because you treat every person on this ranch with the same respect, from Frank right down to the youngest stable boy. Because you're the strongest, most compassionate woman I've ever known." He cupped her face in his hands, his gaze intense. "The day you agreed to marry me was the luckiest day of my life. Don't let Eliza Hollister or anyone else make you doubt that or yourself ever again." His faith in her was like a shield against the doubts that had plagued her for so long. Slowly, Dahlia was learning to see herself through Yates's eyes as someone worthy, capable, and loved. As the wedding approached, a surprising letter arrived from Nebraska. It was from her father, his bold handwriting immediately recognizable. "Dear daughter," it began formally, "your mother and I have discussed your upcoming marriage. While we remain concerned about the hasty nature of the arrangement, we have decided to attend the ceremony if our presence would be welcome." Dahlia read the words twice, hardly believing them. Her parents coming to her wedding. After so many months of silence, Yates was cautiously supportive. "It's a good sign that they want to come," he said when she showed him the letter. "But I don't want them hurting you again. You don't owe them anything, Dahlia. If you'd rather not have them here, just say the word." Dahlia considered his offer carefully. Part of her wanted to refuse, to protect herself from further disappointment. But another part, the part that had always yearned for her parents' approval, couldn't quite give up hope. "I think they should come," she decided finally. "Maybe seeing us together, seeing our life here, will help them understand." Yates nodded, squeezing her hand. "Then we'll welcome them. But remember, no matter what happens, you have a family now. Me, the ranch hands, even old Cookie, people who value you exactly as you are." The day of the wedding dawned clear and crisp, the October air carrying the scent of pine and wood smoke. The ceremony would be held outdoors, in a meadow on the ranch where wildflowers still bloomed despite the advancing season. Chairs had been arranged in neat rows, and an arch of aspen branches, their leaves shimmering gold in the sunlight, stood ready for the bride and groom. In the guest room that would soon no longer be hers, Dahlia sat at the dressing table as Aunt Meredith, who had arrived the day before, helped with the final touches to her appearance. "You look beautiful," Meredith said, adjusting the simple wreath of white roses that crowned Dahlia's dark hair. Her wedding dress, made by the town's seamstress, was elegant in its simplicity, ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. "Thank you," Dahlia replied, her voice steady despite the butterflies in her stomach. "Have my parents arrived?" Meredith nodded, her expression unreadable. "They're downstairs. Your father seems uncomfortable." Dahlia smiled wryly. "He's always uncomfortable away from the farm." A knock at the door interrupted them. Frank's voice called through. "Miss Dahlia, your father's here, says he needs to speak with you before the ceremony." Dahlia and Meredith exchanged surprised glances. "Send him in," Dahlia called after a moment's hesitation. George Ziegler entered awkwardly, his tall frame seeming too large for the dainty guest room. He wore a suit that had seen better days but had clearly been brushed and pressed for the occasion. His weathered face was as stoic as ever, but there was something different in his eyes as they fell on his daughter. "Meredith, might I have a moment alone with Dahlia?" he asked, his voice gruff. Meredith looked to Dahlia, who nodded. "I'll be right outside if you need me," her aunt said meaningfully before withdrawing. When the door closed, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Dahlia turned on her stool to face her father fully, waiting for him to speak. "You look nice," he said finally, the compliment sounding rusty from disuse. "Thank you," Dahlia replied, uncertain where this was heading. George cleared his throat, his hands fidgeting with his hat. "I've met your young man. Seems decent enough. Got a good operation here." Dahlia nodded. "Yes. Yates is a good man." Another silence stretched between them until George blurted, "I didn't come up here just to give you away." Dahlia blinked, surprised. "You didn't?" "No." He took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "I came to apologize." Of all the things Dahlia had expected, this was the last. She stared at her father, speechless. "Your mother and I, we didn't understand you, still don't, if I'm honest." He ran a hand through his thinning hair. "Farming's all I know, all I ever wanted to know. I couldn't make sense of a child who'd rather read poetry than learn to plow a straight furrow." Dahlia remained silent, afraid that any interruption might stem this unprecedented flow of words from her taciturn father. "We thought we were doing right by you, teaching you practical skills. But we were wrong to call you useless." His voice cracked slightly on the word. "No child should hear that from their parents, and seeing you here, how these people respect you, how that man looks at you, well, it's clear we were wrong about a lot of things." Tears welled in Dahlia's eyes, but she blinked them back, not wanting to ruin her appearance before the ceremony. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," George continued. "Just wanted you to know that we—" He struggled, emotions clearly foreign territory for him. "We're proud of you, Dahlia." Should have said it years ago. The words Dahlia had longed to hear her entire life hung in the air between them. She stood, moving toward her father cautiously, as if approaching a skittish horse. "Thank you, Papa," she said softly, using the childhood name she had abandoned long ago. "That means more than you know." George nodded jerkily, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional exchange. "Well, better get ready, can't keep everyone waiting." He turned to go, then paused. "Oh, one more thing." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small package wrapped in tissue paper. "Your mother wanted you to have this. It was her grandmother's." Dahlia unwrapped the package to find a delicate silver hairpin topped with a small pearl, a perfect match to the ring Yates had given her. "It's beautiful," she whispered. George nodded again. "Thought it might do for that, something old business brides are supposed to have." He moved toward the door. "I'll be waiting downstairs when you're ready." After he left, Dahlia sat for a long moment, overwhelmed by the unexpected reconciliation. It wasn't perfect. Years of hurt couldn't be erased in a single conversation, but it was a beginning. A chance to build something new with her family, just as she was building a new life with Yates. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of emotion. Dahlia would later remember snippets. Her father's arm steady beneath her hand as he walked her down the aisle. Yates's face lighting up as he saw her, the warmth of his hands holding hers as they spoke their vows. The cheer that went up from the assembled guests, ranch hands, townspeople, and family alike when they were pronounced husband and wife. The celebration afterward lasted well into the evening. Tables had been set up in the ranch yard, laden with food prepared by Cookie and his temporary assistants. Lanterns hung from trees, casting a golden glow over the festivities. A local fiddler and his band provided music, and the dancing continued as stars appeared in the darkening sky. Dahlia found herself pulled from conversation to conversation, accepting congratulations and well wishes. Even Mrs. Hollister approached, her attitude notably warmer than before. "You've done wonders with the ranch house, Mrs. Whitfield," she said, using Dahlia's new title for the first time. "Perhaps you might consider joining Our Ladies' Aid Society. We could use someone with your eye for detail." "Thank you, Mrs. Hollister." "I'd be delighted," Dahlia replied graciously, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. Later, as the night grew cool and the party began to wind down, Dahlia found herself momentarily alone, watching the dancers from the edge of the yard. Yates appeared at her side, slipping an arm around her waist. "Happy, Mrs. Whitfield?" he murmured against her ear. Dahlia turned to face him, her heart full to bursting with joy. "Happier than I ever imagined possible," Yates smiled, drawing her closer. Good. Because this is just the beginning. And as they swayed together under the starry Colorado sky, Dahlia knew he was right. This was just the beginning of their story, a story of love, of healing, of finding value in oneself and in each other. A story that had started when her parents called her useless and sent her away, only to find a man who said she was all he needed. 3 years later, Dahlia sat on the same porch swing where Yates had proposed, a journal open on her lap, her pen moving swiftly across the page. The ranch had prospered under their joint care, Yates handling the cattle and business aspects, Dahlia overseeing the household, and, increasingly, sharing her poetry with a wider audience. Her first small collection, Prairie Whispers, had been published by a Denver press the previous year, receiving modest but encouraging reviews. Mama, look. Dahlia glanced up to see her 2-year-old daughter, Lily, toddling across the yard, a wildflower clutched in her tiny fist. Behind her, Yates walked at a measured pace, their 3-month-old son, Daniel, cradled against his broad chest. I got a flower, Lily announced proudly, presenting her slightly crushed treasure. It's beautiful, sweetheart, Dahlia said, accepting the gift. Just like you. Lily beamed, her blue eyes, so like her father's, sparkling with pleasure at the praise. She was a sunbeam of a child, curious and joyful, with Dahlia's dark hair and Yates's ready smile. She insisted on picking it just for you, Yates said, settling beside them on the swing. Baby Daniel stirred against him, his tiny face peaceful in sleep. Said Mama needed something pretty for her book. Dahlia laughed softly, tucking the flower between the pages of her journal, and she's absolutely right, every poet needs inspiration. Lily, satisfied with her mother's reaction, darted off to examine a butterfly that had landed nearby. Yates shifted Daniel to one arm so he could wrap the other around Dahlia's shoulders. Working on something new, he asked, nodding toward the journal. Dahlia nodded. A series about finding home. About belonging. She leaned into his embrace, her voice softening, about how sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as disappointments. Yates understood immediately, like being sent away by your parents, exactly. Dahlia watched Lily chase the butterfly, her heart so full it almost hurt. If they hadn't sent me away, I would never have come here, never have found you, never have discovered that I wasn't useless after all. Yates pressed a kiss to her temple. You were never useless, Dahlia, never. You just needed to find people who could see your value. In the distance, the ranch hands were returning from the day's work, dust rising from the hooves of their horses. The mountains stood sentinel against the horizon, painted gold by the setting sun. And here on this porch was everything Dahlia had ever truly wanted: love, family, purpose, acceptance. I got another one, Lily called, running back with a new flower. For baby Daniel. That's very thoughtful, my love, Dahlia said, helping her daughter tuck the flower into the blanket wrapped around her sleeping brother. As the evening settled around them, Dahlia reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the unwanted daughter to the beloved wife and mother. From the useless dreamer to the published poet, from lost to found. She had written to her parents just the week before, inviting them to visit for Lily's upcoming birthday. Their relationship remained a work in progress, warmer than before, but still marked by the habits of a lifetime. Yet each letter, each brief visit brought a little more healing, a little more understanding on both sides. Penny for your thoughts, Yates asked, his voice low and intimate. Dahlia smiled up at him, at this man who had seen her worth when no one else had. I was just thinking that sometimes the most beautiful stories arise from the most painful beginnings. Yates nodded, his eyes filled with a love that still took her breath away after all this time, and our story is just getting to the good part. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Dahlia knew he was right. Their story of love found in unexpected places, of value discovered where others saw none, of a family created through choice and commitment was indeed just getting to the good part. And she couldn't wait to see how it continued to unfold, day by day, year by year, in this place where she had finally, irrevocably, found home.